So the age-old question, what's more important for getting good grades? Is it IQ or is it personality? Um, it's a fun question to ask, but it's actually very serious. And the reason is I've had a lot of experiences with parents. They'll say out loud, personality, of course, is very important. It's very important to be responsible, conscientious, all that. But based on their actions, I see that they still believe that IQ is extremely important. Um, and the reason this is important to clarify, there's a couple of reasons. One is if a parent believes, if their basic assumption is that IQ is the most important, or more important than personality, it's the most important thing for getting good grades, then they'll have high expectations because my son, when he was in first grade, he was first in his class, scored well on aptitude tests, he has a high IQ, therefore he should have good grades. He doesn't have good grades, what's going on? And then there's a lot of frustration. Instead of that parent focusing on improving and strengthening the personality traits necessary for good grades, they'll just be frustrated. The second reason is even more important and more critical, and something I see quite often is students in that environment will actually start to believe it. And this is really bad, very critical to get this right and solve this problem. If kids believe that IQ is more important for getting good grades and that they're not smart enough because they're not getting good grades, then what do? Well, what's the answer? You can't fix having a low IQ, or you can't improve your IQ, right? So it's important that we get this right and that we understand that personality is way more important. So let's get into it. Before we begin, I want to talk a little bit about what we mean by personality. In the field of psychology, when we talk about personality, we mean something very specific. If you are familiar with Jordan Peterson's work, he's got a website where you can actually get a profile of your personality makeup. The way it's graded, or the way it's evaluated, is, I'll just put up the slide here. There's 5 different personality traits, and these are called the big 5 personality traits. It's kind of the basic thing in psychology. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. What we're most concerned about today is the second one, conscientiousness. Conscientiousness is actually defined in 3 ways. There are 3 parts to conscientiousness. One is high levels of thoughtfulness towards others, good impulse control, and goal-directed behaviors. You need all 3. If you score high on the conscientiousness part, guess what? You're probably going to get good grades, and you're probably going to make a lot of money, and you're going to have a good marriage, and you're going to have good kids. Every major measure of success we have in society depends primarily on conscientiousness, not talent, not IQ. Okay, so there's actually a lot of research that shows that personality is the most important indicator of life success, as well as getting good grades. And most of the research out there, what they do is they compare personality traits versus IQ, right? So they'll measure high IQ students and then measure their personality traits. Low IQ students with personality traits. And time and again, since 50, 60 years back, research has shown that personality is much more important for GPA. We're going to look at 2. One is Duckworth and Seligman's papers. It's called Self-Discipline Outdoes IQ in Predicting Academic Performance in Adolescence. Angela Duckworth of Grit fame, and Martin Seligman, the founder of the positive psychology movement. Very famous work here. Let's just jump into this paper. So what they did was they did 2 separate studies, 8th graders. They used multiple self reports along with reports from parents and teachers. They did questionnaires. They also did tests that evaluated their impulse control behavior, their impulsiveness, their self-control, their self-discipline, all of that stuff. And it's very clear that self-control led to higher grades, it led to higher standardized test scores, higher attendance. They also tested whether these 8th graders would get admitted to a very competitive high school that they were all trying to get into. And the students with more self-control had higher rates of acceptance. They also tested the IQ, and above and beyond, self-control predicted higher GPA, a good GPA, much better than IQ did. Okay. There was a study way back in 1974 where Hogan and Weiss, they looked at high GPA college students and looked at their personality traits as opposed to low GPA students, and found that the high GPA students were also high in responsibility, self-control, and socialization, which is pretty much the definition of conscientiousness, right? Quote, high achievers were characterized by unusual conscientiousness, industry, and dependability. And I really like this quote from the paper. They say that high achievement seemed as much a function of the attention to details and the rules of the academic game as it was of intellectual talent. And that's really the thing. Like, GPA it's not an IQ test, right? Getting a good grade in math, getting a good grade in English, getting a good grade in history is not an IQ test. It's a test of how well students follow instructions laid out by the teacher, right? That's basically, if we're being honest about it, that's what a good grade is for. Whether the student learns or not, that's a subject of debate, but obviously they're going to learn a lot if they follow the instructions of the teacher. Because of the design, the structure of the grading system and school, the way the schools are set up, it's really meant, it really mirrors the way, the kinds of behavior we want to reward in society at large. And that's why conscientiousness is far more important. One book that I want to recommend, it's an easy read. Jessica Leahy, she's a middle school teacher, also a mother. It's a fun read, it's a great read, it's very insightful. The book is called The Gift of Failure: How the Best Parents Learn to Let Go so Their Children Can Succeed. She focuses a lot on the value of failure in teaching students autonomy, right? You let them fail so that they learn from their mistakes and they take control of their own lives and of their own studies, okay? A couple of quotes from the book that I really liked. Kids who are raised by parents with good impulse control, the ability to plan for long-term goals and stick to those goals, are more successful than kids raised by parents who model impulsive, disorganized, chaotic thinking and actions, okay? So we as parents need to be careful, aware. Here's another good quote. A kid who has no ability to delay gratification, has no patience with momentary confusion or frustration, or simply never develops the frontal lobe function he needs in order to organize and plan his behavior is never going to be as successful as one who can. I don't care how brilliant or talented he is. And the research shows this for sure. Okay, so high conscientiousness is the absolute most important thing in getting good grades. If you want your son, daughter to get good grades, that's what you got to focus on. Stop complimenting them for their having a high IQ. That's not going to help. Compliment them for being responsible, for being diligent, for being exercising self-control, having discipline, being thoughtful towards others, making goals, going after those goals. Those are the things you need to encourage. So one more time, just want to show, conscientiousness. This is what we as parents really need to be paying attention to right here. High levels of thoughtfulness, good impulse control, and goal-directed behaviors.